Hey guys, Static here, and today on Dungeon Guide we're going to be covering Veteran Hard Mode Bloodroot Forge. The first thing to keep in mind in both of the Horns of the Reach dungeons is you can skip a lot of the beginning mobs by following our path here. The beginning of this dungeon is actually outside, so you can all hop on your mounts, hug the left side past all the enemies, and arrive at the first boss. The most important thing to remember on this boss is to not get distracted. Yes, he has heavy attacks and a conal, so your tank will want to point him away from the group, but the main mechanic here are the adds. A bunch of different mobs will appear during this fight. There's one important point to make. If the boss dies, they all die. In a lower DPS group, the adds may become a problem, in which case you would need to focus them in between their spawns, but most groups will burn the adds passively by staying on the boss. The only add with any dangerous mechanics here are the Stranglers, which will put a debuff on a party member which periodically spawns a poison AoE on the ground under the player. Focus the Stranglers, ignore the rest, and burn the boss. Like with the first boss fight, the Stranglers are the only troublesome mob in the trash fights at the beginning of this dungeon, and there's a trick to avoiding their poison debuff. As soon as a Strangler is aggroed, the very first thing they will do is the poison attack, which is placed using a ranged projectile. If you see you have their attention at the beginning of a pull, dodge immediately to avoid the poison ball, and the group can burn them down before they have a chance to place this debuff a second time. If the Strangler is alive for too long, they can also burrow underground to a new location. Most pulls have more than one Strangler, so your entire group would need to be aware of this trick and pay attention to who needs to dodge roll. When done right, this entire dungeon can be done with 0 poison AoEs on the ground. This boss can give a lot of groups trouble because they don't understand the mechanics. Her regular attacks are a ranged attack, a conal knockback, and a slow-moving AoE that moves outward, damaging and rooting players. As long as your tank has aggro, none of these are particularly hard to avoid, as they can just point her away from the group. The problem comes during add phase. A forest of protection is grown around her, knocking everyone near the edges of it out. She becomes immune to damage from anyone outside of the forest and will reflect your own attacks back at you, so be careful. The adds that spawn during this phase are no joke. The bear in particular is dangerous. He has a conal to watch out for and a heavy attack that's a one-shot on most players if not blocked or dodged, so you want to focus the bear and get it out of the picture as quickly as possible. You may notice during this phase that the tank has lost aggro and the boss is firing her attacks at will on random party members. That's because not only does she reflect ranged projectiles while in the forest, but she is also immune to taunt. After her forest unsummons, she will teleport to a new location. One more thing you'll notice during this fight are the randomly spawned Stranglers. These can pop up in the middle of add phase, so be aware and call out any Stranglers so your group can deal with them quickly. There is a way to cheese the forest mechanics with a high DPS group by having everyone avoid the edge of the forest knockback by stacking on her before she grows it. Since your group and the boss are both inside of the forest, she remains vulnerable to damage. You will, however, have to deal with the adds while stationary, so this is only recommended for highly coordinated, high damage, and healing output groups. Once you understand the mechanics of this fight, it's really not that bad. Just compartmentalize the fight into phases. Burn hard until she summons the forest, then everyone backs off and regroups, focusing the bear when it appears. Stay on the lookout for Stranglers and call them out in chat. Let your resources regen and refresh your buffs while you wait for her forest to fade. As soon as it drops, follow the teleport and burn hard once again. Once you defeat this boss, you'll enter the inner section of the dungeon, where we won't see any more Stranglers, but we'll be introduced to even more difficult mobs with their own interesting and unique mechanics. Here in Bloodroot Forge, you'll have to call upon your platforming skills. There are several spots throughout this dungeon where lava surrounds small islands. Someone's gonna die at some point by being careless and jumping incorrectly, at the cost of a no-death run, so really take your time and pay attention while crossing these lava pools. Next we encounter our first Minotaur of the melee variety. The main thing to watch out for is his overhand smash, which I totally stand directly underneath here and he pounds me straight into my grave. The interesting thing to notice here is the summon of a small AoE on the ground where he smashed, which will shoot lava at the group for a short time. Don't stand in this and heal your group while taking this extra damage. He can also charge at party members, so have your tank try and keep him pointed away from the group. Next up are the Fire Shulks. These enemies have interesting mechanics involving the lava, so once again, get ready to platform. When engaging these shulks, they will target one player, signified by your screen gaining a lava effect around the edges, and summon a fireball that slowly moves towards you. This fireball will knock you back and place a hellish dot on you, of which most healers can't heal you through. There is, however, a trick. If your screen goes orange, sprint for an island and wait for the fireball to be dissipated by touching the lava. Once that happens, hop back off the island to the mainland, as the longer you stand on an island, the more likely it will burst into flames, dropping you into the lava. Consequently, the more party members standing on the same island seems to speed up this process even more, so try and find your own oasis from the fireballs. Another interesting thing to note is that if the shulks follow you into the lava, they become immune to damage, so you'll need to pull them back on the dry land to defeat them. If there's a pool that contains fire shulks but there isn't any lava around, I suggest pulling them back to a location where the lava can be utilized, ensuring no one gets the knockback dot and maintaining your no death run. Before the next boss, we're introduced to a second type of Minotaur, the Casters. The Minotaur channels a chain attack, summoning chains around a group member, locking them in place. Underneath the chains is summoned two Ares effect, a small ring that grows to meet the outer ring. When it meets the outer ring, an explosion occurs, and if you're standing on this location when it erupts, an equally high damage dot similar to the Fire Shulk knockback dot is placed on the party member, which is almost unhealable. You must bash or interrupt the Minotaur immediately, freeing up your buddy, and they must move at once to avoid the eruption dot. He can also summon a large flame AoE that's pretty avoidable, so just step out of that. Communication is key here, so always stick near the caster Minotaur, call out when someone is chained, and be ready for the interrupt. This boss is pretty straightforward. On normal, you can ignore all mechanics and just pile on and burn him, provided you have the damage to do that. On Vet, you had better obey these mechanics. The boss teleports around periodically and will animate these piles of rock into stone enemies with a string of red projectiles. The adds are key here on Vet, and they must be dealt with, so follow the projectiles to the associated rock pile and burn hard. If they're alive for too long, they will enrage and start to summon flaming rocks from the ground under the entire group, and if overlapped, they can be deadly, so you want to focus them as soon as they are summoned and get them out of the way immediately. The boss's main attack to watch out for is the root placed on the group before summoning fire in all directions. Even after a dodge roll, this root will inflict a heavy snare for a short duration, making it much more difficult to avoid the fire, so try and save stamina and dodge roll and sprint accordingly. Those are the only things to worry about on this fight. Just avoid his fire and break away from him to burn down the adds as soon as they're animated. The problem a lot of groups have are during execute phase. When under 15% HP, the boss will give life to all the rocks in the area. This is where you do not want to focus the adds and burn the boss heavily, ignoring the adds. There are far too many enemies to deal with before they enrage, and your group will probably end up wiping if you try and clear them. The adds will all die when you kill the boss, so save ultimates for execute phase, drop them together, and finish strong. As you come to the final area before the end of this map, you'll see a large group of enemies ahead of you with both a melee and a caster Minotaur in the distance. This is actually a pretty tough pull, and I suggest focusing the Minotaurs at the back of the pack if you wish to engage it. However, as always, I like to share the tricks I find in these dungeons. Climbing up the hill will avoid this pull completely and bring you to the next boss. This is probably both one of the coolest and most difficult boss fights in the game. The first thing you'll notice is, yes, more lava and more platforming. Up until this point, you've just been practicing to stay out of the lava for this fight specifically. His first attack is the same as the melee Minotaur's overhand smash, leaving an even larger AoE erupting lava from it to the group. He also has a conal fire cleave, shooting flames outward, so have your tank point him away if possible. Next we see the summoning of adds. First there's the Fire Shulks, with their same mechanics as before, so if your screen goes orange, run to an island to dissipate the fireball. The islands are also used for when the boss throws his weapon, resulting in a huge explosion across the entire main island. This is a one-shot for all targets. Jump out when he throws his weapon, but don't jump back in directly after the explosion until you hear his roar. Only then is the island again accessible. I totally purposefully demonstrate this here. As the boss gets lower on health, he not only summons fire shocks, but the dreaded stone piles are animated, just like with the last boss. Once again, you do not want to leave these enemies alive long enough to enrage, or this island will be riddled with flaming rocks, making these adds priority number 1. This fight's mechanics aren't all that complicated individually, but it's the combination of everything going on at one time that makes it difficult. Keep your cool. Call out when adds are spawned, use the islands for both fire shocks and his weapon throw, and just be persistent. As with any fight, practice makes perfect. Yes, a low DPS group will have a harder time, but if you can focus down the adds, the rest becomes easy. After clearing the last area of trash before the final boss room, don't forget to check this little corridor to the right. I've seen 2 chests here at the same time. Ever since then, I always make sure I'm not leaving free loot behind. This boss is actually 3 mini-bosses. There's a caster minotaur, a healing mage, and the 2-handed melee boss. The first thing to note, don't go inside the inner ring in the center of the room during this mini-boss fight. Earthgore is down there, and he will spew his lava out if you get too close. The smartest thing your tank can do is grab aggro on the bosses and run to the edge of the room, leashing them out of the center ring so you don't have to fight them while taking that extra damage from Earthgore. Each of these mini-bosses have their own mechanics, but the Minotaur is definitely your first target as it can chain down party members just like regular casters would. Remember to bash or interrupt him and to move immediately after being freed. The Healing Mage can summon a blood rain that soaks up your ground-based AoE effects, forcing you to reapply them. They can also heal one boss directly with the usual channeled heal, which can be bashed or interrupted. The final heal is a channeled AoE heal casted when they're low on health that will need interrupted as soon as possible, as it can take the bosses to full health in a matter of seconds. The melee boss has uppercuts which knock back and hurt quite a bit, which need blocked or dodged. He also can chain in party members, which he'll sometimes do right before his growing AoE ability, which is a one-shot for most players. We grouped up these bosses and burned them down relatively at the same time, but if your group is lacking DPS or is struggling with individual mechanics, try taking them down one at a time, separate from one another, while your tank holds aggro at range. After defeating the mini-bosses, the golden chest is eligible to be opened for armor drops, which I suggest doing prior to engaging the final boss, as you may be here for a while. The first thing I want to showcase here are the altars. Both altars have their own uses to negate certain boss mechanics and when used, help a ton during this fight. The altars are used by using the synergy button once to activate, aimed, and then released at the desired location, unless you have quick casting enabled, in which case it will automatically fire at the location of your reticle when activated. I do not recommend having quick casting enabled for this fight, as you need to make sure you aim these altar synergies with a reasonable level of accuracy. The Billowing Flame Altar is used to interrupt the boss while he does a giant AoE ability that shakes the entire room, making him invulnerable and drops rocks from above that need to be avoided. When hit with the Flame Altar, the boss will also be stunned for a short time as well. Very useful. The Quenching Blood Altar is used to clear lava pools that the boss will have placed around the room, which deal a ton of damage to anyone standing in or near them. Removing these lava pools give your group room to breathe, also very useful. Hard mode is activated by reading the scroll on the ground near the golden chest. Guess what? On hard mode, you don't get to use the altar synergies. That's right, you're now forced to deal with the falling rocks for the entirety of his channeled attack. More worrisome is the inability to clear the lava effectively turns this fight into a DPS race. The longer the fight lasts, the more lava placed, with no way of removal until you run out of room and are swallowed up by the damage they radiate. Also, you get the added comfort of randomly falling rocks throughout the fight. Now that we've covered how much this fight sucks, let's talk mechanics and strategy. As I mentioned, this is a DPS race, so you need to manage placement of lava as best you can early in the fight to ensure you have room to finish later. The best way to do this is to start the fight by having your tank pull the boss to one of the corners in the room that have large bodies of lava already. The reason being is because the boss places lava in a straight line, so you can control where the early lava is placed by having your tank point him into one of these corners. The second thing to watch out for is the boss's heavy attack called Anvil Cracker, and it's a one-shot on all targets if it's not blocked. This is telegraphed by holding his arm across his body with white lines coming from around his head, signifying he's about to swing. As we showed earlier, he becomes immune to damage and makes extra rocks fall from above. Just regen some resources, get your buffs back up, and stay mobile. Earthgore will eventually spawn another smaller version of himself, and guess what? This little guy can do all 3 of his main attacks as well, spawning lava, shaking rocks from above, and heavy attacking. This is when it becomes difficult to manage where the lava is going. Even if your tank's holding aggro, they're eligible to turn around and shoot this lava pool in any party member's direction, so you all need to keep in mind what's behind you and try to point the lava in a safe location. One gets away from us here, so we need to relocate. Notice something new? That's right, Earthgore summons a third, even smaller version of himself. But don't think that means he doesn't hit hard. That pint-sized heavy attack is still a one-shot and needs to be blocked. These bosses have a large hitbox, so your tank may have trouble holding all 3 taunts. Don't be surprised if one gets loose and you find yourself tanking it. Stay calm. The regular light attacks don't hurt much. It's literally just the heavy attack that's the problem. As long as you block it, you should survive long enough for your tank to regain aggro. Call out the lowest HP boss and focus it. You're almost done. You should have been saving your ultimates for the 3 boss phase, dumping them together and executing the lowest. Burn hard from here on out. Time is of the essence, as it only takes 1 poorly placed lava in the center of the room to wipe the group. There is a bit of RNG here. Hope the bosses choose targets with a lava already behind them to overlap rather than the open spaces. Letting up pressure at this point is a death wish. You need to keep burning hard all the way to the end. There will be a ton of groups that straight up will not have enough DPS to finish this hard mode here, and there's no knowledge of mechanics or strategies that can really help that. Hard mode is a DPS check. Make sure your healer is applying as much DPS as possible as well. You need it to complete this one. I honestly wouldn't recommend even attempting hard mode with a pug group. Build your group specifically for this one and follow the mechanics closely. With the right group composition, a lot of practice, and a little bit of luck as well, you'll eventually be able to complete this difficult hard mode achievement. Thanks for checking out the video, guys. Please smash that like and subscribe button below for future content releases. I really appreciate the support everybody's been showing me. So I want to just say thank you to each and every one of you. It really means a lot to me. See you guys later and catch you next time.